Robert Bonney, United States Undersecretary of Agriculture, thank you very much indeed for joining us at the Forum for the Future of Agriculture's annual program. It's a great pleasure to be with you and to be hosted here by you at the Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C. As you know, the Forum continues to explore ways as to how we can accelerate the transformation of the food and agriculture system globally to make it more resilient, even more sustainable, and perhaps most importantly, from a climate change perspective, able to mitigate the effects that that change will have on the sector and also to make a contribution more globally to mitigating the effects. And in that respect, I'd like to start by asking you about the Climate Smart Commodities program that you recently launched. $1 billion of investment to create voluntary incentives that will boost production of livestock and grain production in ways that reduce emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, and sequester carbon. Given the fact that there are similar efforts underway in the European Union today, I know that the Forum and our stakeholders be particularly interested in how important you see this program, given the plethora of priorities that USDA has, and what you think the critical success factors will be.
It's great to be with you, and great to have this conversation at a really important time for our alliance. And this is a really important program for us. We have a broad set of programs where we're going to work with U.S. agriculture and forestry to both make their operations more resilient and to address climate mitigation. This program in particular is important because, just like you all, we're trying to take advantage of the growing consumer interest, companies that want to green their supply chain, whoever it is. We want to create something that allows agriculture to take advantage of that. And while there's a lot of alignment between good climate mitigation practices in agriculture, soil health can contribute to productivity, improving nutrient management can reduce nitrous oxide emissions, but also improve our farmers' bottom line. There's a lot of alignment there. That doesn't mean there aren't costs. And so what we're trying to do is provide resources to help deploy climate smart practices across farms, ranches, and our forest lands. And then also provide resources for the measurement, monitoring, verification that goes along with that. And to do it in a way that a little bit lets agriculture determine what climate smart commodity, maybe it's a climate smart soybean or climate smart cotton or whatever it is, or maybe they're interested in carbon and reductions there. We're a little bit leaving that to them, but are interested in how can we dramatically scale up the adoption of these practices and then do it in a way that we measure monitoring so we know the outcomes. This is pilots. We're going to learn from these. And we also want to make sure that those pilots are broadly reflective of U.S. agriculture. We want small producers, medium-sized, large. We want different crop types, different livestock, different forest operations. We want to make sure from an equity standpoint that everybody gets to participate. So this is one arrow in our quiver here at USDA, but I think it's a very important one.
You've talked there and in the announcement about the importance of monitoring, reporting, and verification to demonstrate the climate smart outcomes, to ensure that they're real. And again, that's a similar part of the debate that's taking place in Europe. How do you know that it works and has the effect that you want? Could you just say a little bit more about why you think that really is important for building trust and confidence in these programs? And then as a build on that, given the plethora of climate projects and programs that have sprung up in the United States and the European Union over the last few years, how can growers and ranchers make informed choices about the quality of the programs that they're going to join?
Yeah, I mean, the first part of your question is incredibly important. We're, in essence, asking the U.S. taxpayer to come help our farmers, ranchers, forest owners put these practices in place. We want to know what the outcomes are. And so in the context of this program, that monitoring verification is really, really important. It's actually important way beyond the program for many of the reasons you raise. It's vitally important that that markets understand where their investments are paying off, that the public, we've got to maintain public confidence in this as well. I've been at the climate change policy debate around agriculture and forestry for a long time. And there's been a lot of hand-wringing and teeth gnashing about, does this stuff count? What do we have to, if we're offsetting it, is it real, is it permanent, all that stuff. Our best argument is to have data and to demonstrate that this can actually work. I am very confident it can work. I'm very confident we can track it over time. But no one's going to take me or anybody else at their word. And so we have to make investments in the U.S. in monitoring and verification and all that. We've got to make investments in better inventory. We have a very good forest inventory in this country. We need to improve it in the context of climate. We have a very good inventory on the ag side. We've got a lot of work to do there to make it better. And again, important for market confidence, important for public confidence, and to know where and how we should be spending our dollars. I forgot the second piece of your question.
How can we ensure that growers and ranchers make informed choices about the quality of the programs that they're joining, given the plethora of projects and pilots that have sprung up, both in Europe but also here in the United States?
To me, there's sort of two parts to this question. One is there are a lot of methodologies and standards and things out there, and how do we deal with that? And what we're saying right now at USDA is we're going to try some things, we're going to pilot some things, we're going to learn from that. But what we hear from our farmers, ranchers, forest owners, and others is concern about the number of standards. How do they know? How do they navigate this? And I think we'll do some learning here, but there's a longer term question. What role in USDA in those markets? Right now we provide a lot of data that is used, and that's really important. We haven't got into the standard setting business. I don't know that we want to go there or not. That's going to be a conversation with U.S. Agriculture and Forestry. What's the best, and the market, what's the best way for us to improve the credibility here? The first part of your question is really important for all of our landowners and our producers. We're asking them to make investments in climate smart practices. They've got some other things they need to do, whether it's grow a crop or whether it's livestock, whatever it is. And we're asking them to undertake those investments. We need to give them better data on what the outcomes of those are, both for climate mitigation, the potential opportunities there for them, but on the resilience side there. Can soil health practices improve the resilience of their soils to drought? Are there opportunities to reduce the threat of forests to wildfire? We need better data on the front end for those producers to understand exactly what that investment yields in terms of not only production, but also the co-benefits that go along with that.
I want to come back to the standard setting piece in a second, particularly in relation to the collaboration with the European Union in that area. Before I do, you touched on this in your answer about how growers and ranchers have confidence to make the investment. There are people, stakeholders, both in the European Union but also here, some of them political, that say this is a distraction. The climate agenda, it's a distraction. Their primary focus is producing food, safe, healthy, affordable food. How do you respond to that criticism?
So there are almost two arguments there. One is there are actually folks in the environmental community have argued this is an energy problem. Why are we talking about agriculture? And then there are other folks that make the argument you're talking about. We only have to look across the U.S. landscape of the last decade to see that climate change is here. It's real. We're having to adapt to it. I had a congressman the other day say to me, "My farmers and ranchers aren't talking about climate change." My response was, no, they're not, but they're talking about extreme weather events, they're talking about drought, and they're talking about wildfire. And so in this country, you've seen, I was here in 2009 and 10 at the beginning of the Obama administration. Lots of concern in agriculture and forestry about what climate policy would look like. And so agriculture and forestry stakeholders very nervous about even engaging in the conversation. They're in a very different place now. They are at the table, engaged, and recognizing both the mitigation potential, but also that this is an important conversation about resilience and the future of agriculture. And so we're having a really productive conversation with agriculture and forestry. And on the environment side, there is a growing understanding that if you want to make the math work by 2050, that we actually need to address agriculture and forestry. And I think we've made a lot of progress there as well. I think with the public, we still have some work to do to get them to understand that land actually matters and all this. It matters for a lot of other reasons too, obviously food and fiber amongst them, and conservation and wildlife and those types of things. But I think we have some work to do with the public to get them to understand, hey, agriculture and forestry actually have a game to play here.
It's interesting to see the similar dynamics that are taking place here, as indeed in the European Union. Given the similarities of the approach, and I think that they are quite significant, do you see yourself climate smart commodities as being an area that you'd want to collaborate with the European Union on? And if so, in what form? And without wishing to lead you, we talked earlier about standards and standard setting. There could be a plethora of standards in the United States. There could be a plethora of standards in the European Union. Is that an area where the two sides could potentially come together and say, this is what good looks like?
Yeah, I think that there's an important dialogue to have there. Clearly, we're going to need convergence at some point. What's going to be important for us domestically is to have agriculture and forestry come along, as well as the scientific community, the environmental community, come along for that, and to have input, and to feel like there's some recognition that the standards conversation is important. They're telling us it's important right now, but how we do it, making sure that the standards we produce are cost effective, I think that's really important. And I think it's unavoidable in international trade markets for us to have this conversation. There are a ton of places where we need to work with you all, we can learn from you all, and potentially vice versa. And so having our scientists and our farmers and ranchers and others exchanging information, understanding what Europe's doing versus what the US is doing, I think is critically important. We need to strengthen the alliance. You know, on the climate, we're all in this together. I think there's a lot to learn. And I do think there's enough interest in the markets internationally that thinking about how that convergence happens and how we create an open dialogue so that it works for your producers just as it works for our producers.
Right. And then kind of building on that, if I may, Mr. Undersecretary, last November, Secretary Vilsack and Commissioner Wojciechowski came together in Brussels to launch a transatlantic platform for collaboration on agriculture. An area which, if we're honest, the two sides under multiple administrations and leadership in the Commission, in the European Commission, not always seen eye to eye on. How important do you think that is? What progress are you seeing over the past 6 months since that was launched, and what comes next?
Well, and again, this is a critically important dialogue. It's a critically important understanding to understand your all's position, ours, and others, and I do think there's a lot of common ground here that we can take advantage of. And a recognition, you know, part of the conversation we're having is about deployment of climate smart practices and what that looks like and what those practices are, and conversations about inputs and all those things, and I think that's important. I think we're going to need, we want to, from a U.S. perspective, stay focused on outcomes, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, continued productivity, amongst others. And we're also having this argument, or not argument, we're having this conversation about what do we do about the world's forests and tropical deforestation and the role that commodities play in that as well. And that's a place where productivity of our agricultural lands actually matters a lot, because we don't want to shift production to other parts of the world which may impact forests and create deforestation. So this conversation about maintaining productivity turns out to be really important from a climate standpoint. Obviously, reducing emissions is incredibly important from a climate standpoint. And I think, you know, working through what differences we may have, but also the commonality, the research and other things is going to be really, really important. And, you know, we sometimes think about this problem in the context of we've got to hit net zero by 2050. We've also got to feed 9+ billion people by 2050, and that is a critically important part of the challenge. And I think that conversation in the context of climate is really important as well.
So perhaps final question to you, Mr. Undersecretary. I mean, over the last 6 months, we've seen a number of international meetings focused on this interface between climate, environment, food production, UN Food Systems Summit last September, leading into COP26. We build towards COP27 this year. All have implications for the transformation of the food and agriculture system globally. So when you reflect on the various steps that have been taken by the United States and indeed by your partners around the world, how would you assess the progress to meeting those goals of a more resilient, sustainable, climate-ready global food and agriculture system?
I think I look back to where we were 10 and 15 years ago. I think we've made enormous progress. We had a very hard time having a conversation about agriculture and forestry in the context of the climate talks and other things. And agriculture in particular was very sensitive. And we're at a place now where we're all having this conversation. Everybody recognizes its importance. And I think in that sense, we've made enormous progress. Our challenge is the clock is ticking. We know we've got aggressive timelines to meet by 2030, aggressive timelines by 2050. And so we've made progress. We have a long way to go. And how do we align incentives there? How do we both recognize the governments have an important role to play here, just as the markets do? And we've got a lot of learning to do quickly to figure out how we deploy this quickly while we maintain the productivity of agriculture and forestry, which is really, really important. So there are huge challenges, but I feel really good in the progress we've made and in the conversation that we're having and in the learning that's taking place. And you know, it's a huge challenge, but I think we can get there.
Well, thank you for that, Mr. Undersecretary, and also for taking the time to join our program this year. It's been a great pleasure to talk to you and to listen to your insights and thinking about how we address this important topic. Thank you very much again, and we do look forward to seeing you again sometime very near future at the Forum for the Future of Agriculture.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you.